Welcome back. So we're going to be tackling facades. Now, if you're not familiar with the actual term of facades, I bet you, if you've been working with Laravel long enough, you've definitely used a facade. And arguably, facades are probably the most discussed feature of Laravel. And I do feel personally that it comes from the fact that people don't quite understand how facades actually work. Now, at first glance, a facade looks like just a static method call. But behind the scenes, it has nothing to do with static methods except the fact that that's just what it looks like. So as I was prepping for this lesson, I figured what would be the best way to explain facades. And what I came up with is, why don't we build our very own implementation of facades based around how Laravel actually does it, and that way we can take a look at how to actually implement a facade. And then to wrap it up, we'll go ahead and explore the actual implementation that Laravel uses behind the scenes for facades. And you'll see how similar they are to our actual implementation. That way, you're going to have a very firm grasp on facades and how they actually work. Now, using facades is extremely easy. Understanding how they work under the hood, that is an advanced Laravel topic. So let's jump right to it. Let's go to PHP Storm, and this is a totally fresh Laravel 6 project. I don't have anything in here yet. So the example that we're going to be working with today would be the example of a service. It doesn't really exist. I made it up. But what it's going to be, it's going to be a postcard sending service. Just a very simple way for somebody to send a quick postcard by the mail to somebody else. Very simple stuff. We're not really going to implement it. This is just an idea so we can understand how it would actually work. So I will actually do most of the actual work in our route files, but of course, this would be something you'd have in a controller or something like that. So let's add a new route here, and this get route will simply be called /postcards. All right, so let's have a callback right here. And of course, we're going to need some sort of postcard sending service. Again, it doesn't exist, so let's go ahead and make it up. So inside my app, let me add a new PHP class, and it's going to be called postcard sending service. All right, so this very simple class here, obviously, let's have a postcard service, and this is going to equal to a new postcard service. And what sort of information do we need for the postcard? Well, what I was thinking was maybe the first argument would be country. The second one would maybe be the width of the postcard and maybe the height. Again, all made up figures. None of this actually exists. All right, so let's jump right here. Let's add a constructor. And my constructor is going to have the country where we're sending it to, the width of the card, and the height of the card. So let's go ahead and initialize these fields. And there we go. So we have the setup of it done. Now let's do the actual grunt work of it, which will happen in a method I will simply just call hello. So hello will accept our message, the message that we want to send to our person in our postcard. And finally, let's just have maybe an email. So in here, what's the easiest implementation we can do? Why don't we just send them an email? So we'll start off with that. We'll send a raw email containing the message, and then as a callback, we'll actually need to set our email address. Now, because PHP doesn't actually have access to email, we'll have to go ahead and use email. So in here, I could just say message. This message is going to be to this email address. All right, then here, we'll actually mail out somehow our postcard through some service. And of course, at this point, you'll have access to things like this country and this width, and finally, of course, this height. So these are things that are going to be set up through the constructor of our service. And of course, we'll use these to somehow call out a service that actually sends out a postcard. All right, simple enough. So for this example, we'll go ahead and dump at this stage and just say, all right, well, the postcard was sent with the message, and then we'll just tag on the message. And we'll have to add a period there. All right, so very simple class. It doesn't really do anything. Again, this is just for an example. So we have this postcard sending service we're going to construct our method, and then let's go ahead and use it right here. So of course, country, we're going to have to pass in maybe US. As a width, we'll say is 4 inches, and for a height, maybe we'll say is 6 inches. So we're going to send a postcard to a US address with a width and a height. Awesome. All right, so what will we have to do after this? Well, of course, we'll have to actually call that hello method that we implemented. And we'll say hello from Coders Tape USA. All right, and as an email, it's going to be test@test.com. And there we go. All right, let's give this a go in our browser. Let me jump to Chrome. We'll visit facades.test/postcards. And it says that mail was not found. That's because I did not import mail. Let me go ahead and do that now. So mail, I do need to import this class. And there it is. And as a matter of fact, funny enough, facades. This is actually a facade. This is what it looks like when you use one. Notice how raw seems to be a static method, but we're getting ahead of ourselves. Let's not worry about that just yet. Let me go ahead and refresh here, and there we go. So we did everything correctly, so of course we actually sent out a postcard. But the thing about this is that if I wanted to send a postcard somewhere else in my application, this setup will basically need to be done exactly the same way. So of course, in the first episode of this series, we covered how to bind that into the container and then not have to worry about those things. And facades are loosely based around that. So as you may have been familiar with, from the app service provider, we can go ahead and in my boot method, I can say, all right, this app, register a singleton. And the singleton that we're going to register would be postcard service class. And how do we construct one? Well, to do that, we'll basically have our app here, and we already wrote the logic for this. So all I would have to do is just copy it from right here. So this is how we construct that. So we'll return it as an object, and there we go. So at this point, this would work. So in our controller, we could go ahead and just simply ask for this class, and it would be created for us. But we are discussing facades. So let's go ahead and create a new route here. And this is going to be version 2. This is the facade version of this implementation. So we'll use facades and then function. All right. And inside of here, the first thing I'll need to do, as you know, with facades is you'll actually need a file. So let's create a fresh PHP class, and let's call this one postcard. The first thing I need is an alias, right? The way that these work is with an alias. Now, from an app service provider standpoint, we're passing in a class name. But you may not know this, you can actually just pass in an alias. So we could say, you know what? It's just a string for postcard. Okay. So now that we have this class created, to understand facades, where the magic actually happens is a PHP feature called magic methods. Now you may not know this, but you can have magic methods that grab any calls to any static method that doesn't actually exist on the class. And the way that it works is that you would have public static function, and the magic method needs to be called call static. So if you have this method in any of your classes, what's going to end up happening is that if you call a method statically on a class, in this instance postcard, then if it trickles down, then of course it will answer this. And I'm going to prove it to you right now. It's a very simple experiment. So we'll say, all right, postcard, and we are importing that up here at the top, right? So postcard, let's call a method that doesn't exist. We'll just call it any. And what do you expect to happen? Let's go ahead and go to /facades. It says call static must have exactly 2 arguments. But that error is actually coming from the fact that this is here. I'll comment that out. All right, let's try it again. There we go. So we're calling to an undefined method of any. It doesn't exist. So how would you typically fix this? Well, you add a public static function called any. And maybe let's just dump in here and just say inside. So now if we refresh, of course, we get inside. But check this out. If this method exists, then it will call it. But if it doesn't exist, then it will actually call static. Now, call static receives 2 methods. The first one is going to be the name, and the second one is going to be any arguments that you pass in. We'll show what each of these are. So let me go ahead and move the dump statement inside of call static. And if I hit refresh, I still get it. And to prove it, let's do 1, 2, 3. So there we go. So even though any doesn't exist inside the postcard as a static method, we are able to grab that call using this magic method of underscore underscore call static. All right, so now that we have that, let's go ahead and dump name, because I want to show you what that actually gives us. So we'll die and dump the name, and we'll hit refresh, and any. So obviously, name is actually the method that we're trying to access. So in this case, it's called any. If it's something, and we come back here, it will be something. So let's rename that variable so it makes a little bit more sense, and let's just call it method. So that's the method that we are calling. And then arguments, let's go ahead and dump arguments. And now it's going to be empty, but let's go ahead and add an argument. So it's anything that I pass here. So we'll say 1, 2, 3, and then maybe ABC as a second string. If I hit refresh, then we get an array of each of the arguments. So we have 1, 2, 3, and ABC. Are you with me so far? Obviously, this is just a PHP feature. This has nothing to do with Laravel, but it's just a language feature that we have. So now that we've captured this static call, we can actually grab the method and argument and resolve the facade. And this is exactly how Laravel does it. So what we could do is the following. You may not know this, but you could use the app helper, and the app helper will actually give you your entire app. Now, I know it doesn't look like a lot right now, but this is your entire Laravel application. But you can actually access any particular bindings from your app service provider or any other provider. And the binding that we're looking for right now is the one called Postcard. But you can access any of the bindings. So check this out. In our app, as an array, we can actually call Postcard. And now, if we hit refresh, notice that we get back a postcard sending service. So we are diving into the container and we are grabbing our singleton, and what we're actually getting is our postcard sending service. Pretty cool stuff, right? So it almost works like magic. You can also do this a different way. I'll just show you. It's the exact same thing, but of course there are different ways that you can do this. So another way is that you could use the make method, and this will give you the same exact thing. I'll show it to you. We'll hit refresh, and sure enough, you get the exact same result. So you can access it either way. We'll stick to the array notation. So app, again, is your entire application, and then you can access any bindings using the array notation. So, okay, so let's go ahead and add this postcard maybe somewhere here in a different method. So let's have a protected static function, and let's call it resolve facade. And resolve facade is going to accept a name, and inside of here, this is sort of where we're going to do this statement right here. So we'll go ahead and return our app, and we're going to dive into our app, and I'm going to say, go ahead and resolve anything with this name, with whatever the binding is at this point. We'll go ahead and resolve that and return it right away back to the user. So now when we call this statically, the first thing we need to do, of course, is we need to resolve the actual facade out of our container. So to do that, we can simply return and say, okay, self. Remember, we are in static mode right here. So you cannot do this at this stage because there is no this. We are calling this statically. So we need to call everything from a static perspective. So to call it from a static perspective, you use self : meaning it's self. Go ahead and call oneself. So let's go ahead and resolve a facade. And the facade that we're looking for is postcard. So now that we have that, let me go ahead and just die and dump this because I just want you to see what we get each step of the way. So let's go ahead and resolve this. And sure enough, we still get our postcard sending service. So at this point, we have our postcard. And so all we need to do is grab our method. Now let me refresh your memory one more time with this method. I'll go ahead and die and dump method. And remember, method is at this point something. Let's go back and change it to what we actually want. Remember, we're trying to call this hello method. So let's call the hello method. So now that is equal to hello. Great. So now what we could do is on this object that we got back, we can actually call in the method. And this method call is actually dynamic. Notice the $ in front. If it was without that, then it's just simply a method call, but it is static. We're physically calling method. But if we add the $, now we are dynamically calling method. But it's just a property unless you put the actual parentheses. And now it is a method call. Now you may not know this, but from our arguments right here, we can simply spread anything in that array using 3 dots. So we'll say ... and then arguments. And that's it. At this point, this is a working implementation of a facade. Let me prove it to you. I'll simply hit refresh, and now it says that the address in the mailbox giving ABC does not comply. Of course, we are calling some random thing, and it's not really working with ABC. But if we say hello from facade, and then let's give it an email, abc@123.com. Let's give that one more chance, and there we go. So postcard was sent with the message of hello from facade. So notice the difference. This is the long way of doing it, and this is the facade way of doing it. So the one advantage here that you can see right away is the fact that we don't have to worry about instantiating this class and passing all these different methods to it, but rather we're just simply calling this nice postcard method and not worrying about it at all. So why don't we dive deep and see how the Laravel implementation is different from the one that we just created. But before we do that, let's do a very quick recap of what we actually did. So in my app service provider, I registered a singleton. And the singleton is going to be referenced using postcard. It's just simply a string. So what we are actually outputting out of this callback is the instructions on how to generate this postcard sending service. It doesn't really exist again, but this postcard sending service, all it does is it sends an email, and then it's supposed to be sending some sort of postcard through a service, and then we're simply dumping out the message that we included. That's it. Very simple class. It doesn't really do anything. So then in my actual postcard, this is our implementation of a facade. So what we're actually grabbing is we are grabbing our entire application and we are resolving out name. So in this particular instance, name, we are setting that equal to postcard to match the exact same string that we have inside our app service provider. So inside of this postcard, we are actually calling a dynamic method on it that we received through this call static. Now, call static is a PHP function that again grabs any static method calls that get passed into this class when the class actually doesn't have a static method by that name. And the static method that we are calling is hello. So we are calling hello, but hello doesn't exist on this postcard class. There's no method here actually called hello. The hello method is inside my postcard sending service. But notice that this hello is not static. This is a real public method inside a real class that does get completely instantiated, and it is not a static call. It just makes it seem this way because of the notation. But the way that we've written the code around it, this is a real class. This is no different than this implementation up here. These 2 lines here and this 1 line here do exactly the same thing. The only difference is that this class has a nice name, nice alias, and we can simply not worry about having to instantiate the class the way we did up here. We just simply call it in this nice notation and we are good to go. All right, so with that recap under our belts, let's go ahead and dive into the Laravel version. So now there is a file inside your project that you may not even know exists, but inside Bootstrap, inside Cache, we have this services.php class. And if we scroll down a little bit out of this class, we have this list right here. So check this out. These are all basically the same bindings. They are aliases, no different than this alias right here that we generated. So let's take a look at the mail facade. So the mail facade is actually called mailer. And I'll show you how to actually look for it. So if I go back to postcard sending service, here's the facade that we are using. and here's the class for it. So we can actually jump into this class, and you notice that this class of mail extends facade. We'll take a look at facade in just a second. Now, this first method here has to do with testing and how you can swap out a facade for a fake. Forget about this method for now. We are not interested. But check out this right here. This is the get facade accessor. And notice what we have here. This is very similar to our implementation. In our implementation, of course, it was postcard. And if you remember from our actual facade, it's right here. So we have this method right here that all it does is it just returns the string of mailer. And the string of mailer is matched up to this mailer right here. So this is the same thing. This is what it's referencing. Now, the one thing about it is that you can see that it is associated to the mail service provider. So let's jump to the mail service provider and let's check out what needs to happen here. Now, notice this right here. We are registering a singleton, exactly how we did in our app service provider right here. Now, the difference is, of course, we have one line of setup, but check out how big the setup is for instantiating a mail facade. It would be very difficult for you to have to repeat all this code every time you needed to instantiate mail. So mailer is setting up a nice singleton inside of our container. And of course, it is actually generating a new mailer class, which is this mailer class would be equivalent to our postcard sending service class, which is a real class. But if you keep going inside of here, of course, you see things like setting up for queues. We see things like setting the from, the reply to. This is a very complicated setup. And if we jump into the mailer class, you'll notice methods in here like to, for example. But notice that to is not static. You'll notice CC for carbon copy and blind CC and HTML, and of course, raw. This raw class, if you remember back from our postcard sending service, is right here. But notice how, again, it looks like we are calling raw statically, but we are not. The raw method, as you can see right here, is a real function. And again, it's called raw, and that is what we're actually calling. We're just calling it through the facade. So with that, let's take a look at the actual facade. So if we jump back into the postcard sending service, remember we are using the mail facade. And if I jump into mail, remember that it extends facade. Let's take a look at facade. Of course, there are many methods in here, and this is what they all are. But the one that we are interested in is the get facade accessor. If you remember, this is the method that we are overriding. This is the one that said mailer. So now, if we scroll down, check this out. Does this look familiar right here? Yeah, I think it should. That's exactly what we did in our facade. Notice it right here. So we are grabbing the app, and again, using the array syntax, we are resolving it out of the container. If we take a look back in the facade, there it is. We are statically grabbing the app, and again, grabbing and resolving the name. Now, it does do it a little bit more fancy because there are different cases that it actually handles, but this is ultimately the same thing that we did. And then furthermore, if we scroll all the way to the bottom, check out this call static method. Again, very, very similar to ours, with of course the only exception being that Laravel does a little bit of error checking and things like that, but ultimately, this right here is what we're looking for. So we are actually grabbing our instance, which we resolved the same exact way that we did, and then we're calling this method dynamically, and we're just simply passing in any arguments. So that is a deep dive into how facades actually work. And again, this is one of the most misunderstood things out of Laravel. But now, armed with the information that I've provided for you in this lesson, you have a firm understanding of how facades actually work under the hood. So that's going to complete our lesson today on facades. As always, don't forget to subscribe, share the channel. My name is Victor. Thanks for watching.